You're watching and listening to What's the Difference podcast, a podcast about people living with invisible disabilities and kicking ass at life. Today we have our full panel with us. We have Cynthia.
Hello.
And we have Sam.
Hey, everybody.
And we have Sarah. I'm going to hand it over to Cynthia. Just one quick second before we do, if you haven't had a chance to visit our website, it's what'sthedifferencepodcast.ca. That's where you can hear and see all of our episodes. They're all lined up for you right there. Cynthia, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yes. Okay. So today we have Henriette Ivanans, and Henrietta recently published a book called In Pillness and In Health, which is about her battle with addiction and kidney disease. Henrietta?
Hi, you guys. I'm so delighted to be here. You guys are amazing with the work you're trying to do. I was born and raised in Toronto. I lived in Los Angeles for 22 and a half years, and now I live in Winnipeg. I'm 52. When I was 13 years old, I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, more specifically glomerulonephritis, which is the filters basically deteriorate. I had my first kidney transplant when I was 19 years old, and my mom was the donor. And then I had my second kidney transplant when it rejected at age 40. I had my second kidney transplant at 42 from my husband. It's incredible with these matches. I also suffer with chronic migraines. A number of years ago, about 5 years ago, I was undiagnosed with basically like a chronic nerve pain condition that has been probably the most challenging of all of my issues to deal with. And I'm also 7.5 years sober.
You said you were first diagnosed with kidney disease as a teen. How did it affect those years, your adolescence? And did you think you were able to be a normal teenager? Was school challenging and was it disruptive?
Such a great question, because I haven't thought that far back. But, you know, the thing about being diagnosed with something so serious so young, I think in a way ignorance was bliss. You know, there was when my first kidney transplant went into rejection, I knew more about what was coming in terms of symptoms of kidney failure. But as a teenager, I really did have youth on my side in a lot of ways. And the thing about kidney disease too is that until you get into the fifth stage, which is end stage renal failure, where you really have all of the symptoms, where your kidneys are simply not producing urine, your blood pressure is out of control, you can't balance minerals and vitamins anymore, like the kidney is just unable to do what it's supposed to do. You can really get away with a lot. You can actually live with one kidney very well, which is why people can donate a kidney, and you can almost live with a third of a kidney and not have too many symptoms. So I was really fortunate in that regard. It didn't really slow me down. I didn't really have any of the brain fog that came later. And, you know, my teenage years, I would say for the most part, with the exception of having to go on prednisone, and I don't know if any of you guys have had to be on prednisone, but that's a rough gig, that drug. So, you know, being a teenager and hormonal and then on prednisone, I certainly had my moments. But
what does that do to you? Was it like...
Prednisone, it's a steroid, and some of the side effects are aggressiveness, agitation, weight gain, and then moon face, like having the swelling of the face, which when you're a teenager, I'm 52 now, so I've worked really hard at dealing with that, and it's very minimal today. But when you're a teenager, you're already just struggling with so much in terms of self-esteem. And then to have my face just swell up as a result of this medication, yeah, that was challenging. And then the weight gain too kind of triggered a slight eating disorder. It wasn't as bad as some people deal with.
So first of all, Henrietta, congratulations. It was 7 years, you said, right? That you were sober?
Yes.
That's awesome. Congratulations. So starting with our second question, your father's death was related to his alcoholism. In your book, you noted that you were able to stay at a private school until the end of 8th or 9th grade with the help of, quotes, scholarships, sweat, and tears. Seeing that your mom struggled to make ends meet, how much of the stress as well as your father's addiction do you think contributed to your struggle, or was it more due to your health?
Interesting question. When I was a child, I really didn't understand I interchange the words alcoholism and addiction because I do believe it's a disease, and we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But, I really didn't, I didn't get it. I was a kid, teenager. I really didn't get that my father lost the power of choice. So I didn't understand what it was that, I understood I was told he died of pneumonia, and nobody in my family really talked about his alcoholism, but I knew he was an alcoholic. I mean, it was apparent to me, you see the light in somebody's eyes go out. He always had beer in his hand. So it wasn't, I would say, a joyous childhood in a lot of ways. But when he died, I will say this, my mom was really incredible. She just really stepped up as a single mom. She was ferocious in wanting to, like I said, like you quoted from the book, in wanting to maintain the level of education. My brother was going to Upper Canada College and I was going to Bishop Strawn, and eventually she couldn't financially sustain that. But she really was ferocious in trying to give us a good quality of life all around. So it really wasn't until much, much, much later in my life, in my 40s, when I went to rehab and then got into AA, that I truly understood how my father had suffered. And in fact, today I have way more compassion for him than I ever had as a child. I think that that's, the best way to put it. It was a struggle when I was a kid to really understand. I don't even know that I had negative feelings towards him. I just really didn't get it. And now that I get it and I understand the spiritual struggle and suffering of the alcoholic, my compassion has just deepened for him.
Do you think switching to a public school impacted you more or less? Was it a struggle to fit in?
Yeah, I had such great experiences at both schools. I loved going to Bishop Strawn. I loved it. I still have friendships with people that I met at age 3, and I'm 52, so that's pretty impressive. So I was ready at age 8 to check out the boys. And so I went into an enriched or gifted program at Northern Secondary. And I was just one of those geeky kids. I was very bookish. I enjoyed school. I enjoy reading. I enjoy studying. I enjoy learning. And they were just very different experiences. And I got something out of both of them. I know that's a very Pollyanna answer, but I enjoyed both.
Do you think they were positive, or would you say you would have a positive and a negative?
I don't know that it was a negative experience in high school, other than what I already just kind of touched on, that there was this undercurrent. It really was reduced for me rather, as a monthly appointment at the hospital for sick children. I had a nephrologist and I would go and see him. But like I said earlier, I really wasn't feeling physically sick yet. So you just have that ability as a child. I think it's easier sometimes or a teen, to compartmentalize things. And at least that was my experience. I really didn't dwell too much on it because I didn't feel sick. And my mom knew. I didn't know this, and I don't hold any resentments towards her, but she knew it was going to end in transplant for me, but I didn't know that. So, maybe that decision also helped me just have a better experience in high school.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes parents don't tell their kids everything. Because I have epilepsy, and my parents told me I was taking supplements or vitamins, like instead of actual medication.
Yeah. I mean, I think she was probably coming to terms with it too. And she just lost her husband at age 36. My father was 38. She had 2 small kids. She's dealing with so much. And I really do believe you do the best that you can at the time with the knowledge that you have and the experience that you have. And I had my own resentments towards my mom later. Like, I'm not perfect, but that was not one of them for me. Yeah.
I think that this is something that we've probably have not said in an episode before, is that for anybody who lives in Toronto and anybody who lives anywhere in Canada, that the Hospital for Sick Children, now known as SickKids Hospital, is probably one of the best institutions. It's the best institution probably in the country, next to, I know CHEO is also in Ottawa, is pretty good. And I've heard amazing things about a hospital in Edmonton, but SickKids is one of those incredible places, and they save so many lives. And I just want to know, because Henrietta, you're one of, even though you're not that much older than us, you're actually one of the oldest guests that we've interviewed. So I want to know what your memories are from SickKids back in those days, because I know we didn't have that fancy new atrium yet with the flying pigs, and it was the old brown building that is actually going to be demolished in the next few years. Yes.
That makes me so sad too. Sorry, because that's normally the side, like that's my side as well, where I go and I still go to SickKids. Like I've been going there since I'm an infant. So
Yeah. So Henrietta, what are some of your like earliest memories from SickKids?
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I had such a crush on my nephrologist. I loved him, not in like a sexual way, but in a, like, I feel safe with you. I feel heard. I feel taken care of. You know, he was one of those super cool guys who, it was, you have to remember, it was like 84 around the time that I was going on a regular basis. And so, so then that's when Moose came out, and, you know, I had short hair and it was spiky, and I was explaining to him about the layers of how I would do my hair. You know, first I'd wash it, then I'd condition it, then I'd style spritz it, then I'd blow dry it, then I'd, you know, and then I'd add mousse, and then I'd add gel, and then I'd add hairspray. And he's like, "What's mousse?" And, you know, he was just so, he was just so validating in that I felt seen and I felt heard.
I think that's a really good way you express the relationship with your doctor, because that is currently how I feel with my ophthalmologist, and I really couldn't identify and explain to people. I'm like, well, she's like a mother. I don't want to let her down. I don't want to disappoint her. But the way you just worded that, really, really well said. I'm going to be using that from now on.
Also, I think there were echoes of why that was so important for me, because my dad was actually a doctor and he had just died a few years prior to that. He was a general practitioner. So I've been very fortunate. I've had many extraordinary physicians that seem to understand the balance between, you know, being diagnosticians, but really personalizing your experience and understanding how to collaborate with the patient too. Yeah, I'm a little sad that the brown building's going down.
It's still like there's a major campaign with the SickKids Foundation right now to try to raise money for a new building, because they're saying that, you know, 21st century technology can't really take place in the building that's there now. And I was in the old building till I was 8, and then I was actually the first kid to get a tour of the atrium when it opened in '93.
Cool.
Yeah, I actually made it on CTV, and I had this like. I was the first official kid in the new hospital, even though I wasn't actually an inpatient yet. I was later that year.
As a teenager, did you feel that your mom was overprotective of you due to your condition?
The short answer is no. I already touched on this a little bit, but my mom was pretty fantastic given what she was dealt so young, with the loss of my dad so tragically, and then I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, and then my brother started acting out, and she just had a really great way of instilling some tough love, in the sense that, you know, I still had to do chores, I still had to be responsible. It wasn't like a get out of life card, you know, the fact that I was sick and had a diagnosis or anything like that. She was just, and she's an extremely caring, compassionate woman, but she's also very pragmatic. And so the times that I have the fondest memories of her are the times that she would come to the hospital, and we would make silly lists of like what I needed her to bring. And I don't know where this came from, but she had this little saying like, underwear is underwear is underwear is underwear. And it was just like little things like that honestly can lift your spirits when, you know, you're stuck in the hospital for hours and days and weeks on end. So that's the short answer. She really wasn't, like I said, again, there's later in life I had resentments towards her, but given everything that she was handed, I think she's pretty extraordinary.
So Henrietta, in your book, you mentioned that your marriage almost fell apart while you were in rehab because your husband helped or was providing you with pills. Do you think he played a role as an enabler? And looking back, do you think he should have been firmer with you?
No, I mean, that's the short answer. But first of all, with an addict or an alcoholic, it doesn't matter what anybody does. They can enable you or not enable you. And if you want to get sober, you're the one that has to be willing. the thing about our situation, I was diagnosed with chronic kidney transplant rejection in 2008. And he gave me his kidney in 2011. And at that period of time is exactly the period of time that my addiction escalated. I was certainly abusing drugs and alcohol before that, prior to that. And that's often what happens with alcoholics or addicts. There will be like a traumatic event in their life that just triggers an escalation of the disease. And that's certainly what happened to me. So for us, like right after I was diagnosed, it was just on. I just started doing things that you hear alcoholics doing, just drinking more, hiding bottles of wine in my boots, doctor shopping, which if you don't know is getting multiple prescriptions, the same drugs from different doctors, which can become more than problematic, is illegal. And so I was doing all of those things, but for us, you have to understand that it was all very tied up in the same time as my kidney transplant rejecting. And then also the symptoms of renal failure were happening for me. So I was incredibly spiritually sick with addiction, but I was also physically and physiologically sick from losing my transplant. And so it was so embroiled for us. It was so enmeshed that it was difficult to separate, what was he supposed to do? It is also, I just want to interject, it's a very, very small amount of incidents where Kevin enabled me in any way, where he went to pick up prescription meds for me or would buy me a beer or something when I was on dialysis. He definitely did those things. But at that point, and we've talked about it at length since, it's like, what was he supposed to do? First of all, he didn't know what to do. We really didn't understand, as crazy as it sounds now, we really didn't understand that I was an addict. We just didn't. And neither of us really knew what to do about it. I know we both thought if we could just get through this period of time and I could get a kidney and get healthy, that somehow all of this would level out and go away. And I wouldn't need these drugs and alcohol. I think that was a lot of what we were thinking. But we really didn't know how to get help and where to get help. And what was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to kick me out on the street when I was on dialysis because he bought me a beer down the street at the grocery store because I was shaking like this? And I'm like, a beer would really calm me down. And it did. So it is definitely, I don't know how much we're going to get into this later. It's definitely a family disease. It's definitely a disease of the person and then also the people that love them. And everybody becomes so profoundly affected by it that until you know how to exercise any kind of tough love, maybe go to Al-Anon, talk to other people that are going through it. He really didn't have any.
How did your addiction struggles, did they impact you in getting the roles that you wanted? And were there directors who didn't want to work with you because of your addictions?
I mean, truthfully, my active addiction was so intense and such a short period of time. So it was right around the time, like I said, when I was diagnosed with chronic kidney transplant rejection. So by that point, I was starting to feel unwell and I had kind of withdrawn myself from the business. So there's a couple of times where I went to an audition and I was probably a little bit what we call dope sick because I'd taken too many pills. But it was really, like I say, it was such a short period of time, and which often happens to women, that it just like they get their hooks into the drugs or the alcohol, and it spirals very, very quickly. So by that point, I wasn't even really working or anything like that.
Did you find when you were writing your book, did you find that whole process cathartic or therapeutic with your recovery? And kind of what made you decide to actually publish your book?
Oh gosh. Well, there's a lot there to unpack for sure. I knew I had a talent for writing. I had started writing around the time I was diagnosed with rejection in 2008. And in fact, it was Kevin who set up a blog for me. This was like back in the days of Blogger. And he set up a blog for me and he said, write about it. And which is really curious because aside from like a short story contest at Bishop's Drawn that I won, I really hadn't been writing and I wasn't much of a journaling person. And it's just very curious to me that he did that. And what I did is I started to blog about my experiences. And some of the times I was high or drunk. And some of the times I was lucid and sober, and they were very clear. And what I noticed is that people were responding to my honesty, the level of honesty that I was trying to talk about. Like I said, I was very inconsistent at the time. And then when I went into rehab, there were 2 hours every night where we were allowed to have our laptops because they're considered contraband. And it was from 5 to 7 p.m. And every night I would write a blog and I would shoot it out there. And again, people were just I'm not talking big numbers at this point, but I knew that there was something about the one-on-one connection. You know, people were writing to me and saying, I think I have a problem too. And I started to also do that on social media when I got sober. When I finally got sober, it took me a while. I did relapse almost for a couple of years after I came out of rehab. And I finally got my date. And by then I was just hooked on writing. As you said, yes, it was therapeutic, but it was also so creatively fulfilling for me in a way that acting had never been before. I love being a part of telling stories, but then I understood and came to terms with it. I had to tell my own story. And the reason I had to tell my own story was because I really had never understood why my dad died. And I had to, on some level, redeem him, because now I got it. Now I really got how painful it is when you lose the power of choice, where there's a craving that's just triggered when you've crossed some invisible line from drinking occasionally to, and it's not in normal people. This is people like alcoholics. We are physically different. We're physiologically different. And when I cross that line, I can no longer take one pill or one sip. I can't. I know that 100%. And so I wanted to honor him in some way and share the intensity of what Kevin and I went through, that even though I needed a kidney, it couldn't stop me. Even though my husband was willing to give me a kidney, it couldn't stop me. I drank on that kidney. I drank rubbing alcohol on that kidney. I overdosed twice. I cannot stop. And, you know, it's cliche, but there's always such truth in cliches. If I can reach other people with this story, it's also honoring all the people in Alcoholics Anonymous who have helped me have a life today. I don't only have a life because I put this program first. And it has this ripple effect now in everything I do. And it's because those people shared their story with me. And they made me feel like it was safe. And they made me feel like I could get through these steps and I could unpack my deepest, darkest stuff, and that I would be okay. In terms of publishing, you know, it's a enormous undertaking. I don't know how much you want to know about this, but you know, I tried for a long time to get published by a traditional agent and publisher, and it just wasn't, or hasn't been so far in the cards for me. But the process of publishing and marketing and advertising and learning and doing all the things that you have to do to get a book out there yourself has been just extraordinarily challenging for someone like me. I mean, I still type with 2 fingers. I'm not very technologically savvy. And I am so, so proud. I've sold 5,100 books to this date over a year.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing.
Most self-published books sell 100 copies, 100 to 200 copies. And most traditionally published books sell about 5,000.
How do you compare like the healthcare system between Toronto, California, and now Winnipeg?
I'm trying to think of a radical difference. I think probably the amount of time, although I've been stunned by the quality here in Winnipeg. I did read recently they have the best transplant center in Canada, but I don't know who evaluates that. I wouldn't necessarily always have as much time with my transplant nephrologist in Toronto, but at Cedars, I'm not a fan of the American healthcare system. It is a punishing system. It is a problematic system for people who are chronically ill. You know, by the time Kevin and I left, we were paying $1,100 a month. No, $1,200 a month, American, just to maintain insurance. And that's nothing else. It's not the co-pays. It's not the percentage that you pay for medications. It was an extraordinary burden to live with. But I did have really great, like a high-tiered, platinum plan, which meant that I would get 45-hour-long sessions with my nephrologist. and with my transplant team. But truthfully, they're all on an equal level. There's been mistakes that have happened at all the hospitals. Like I said, at SickKids, they made a mistake with one of my biopsies. Kevin had some issues donating his kidney, urological issues with catheters, poor guy. And so far, hopefully nothing will happen in Winnipeg. But I've been extraordinarily lucky. I really haven't had too many unfortunate experiences with physicians where they weren't respectful. Maybe it's more a part of the medical culture today, but they seem to be understanding more and more. Maybe it's because we can Google things too, and we come with information, but they seem to be understanding more the nature of what I believe the relationship needs to be, which is collaborative. I'm coming to you. I'm not a paragraph in a textbook. I'm coming to you with my experiences. I live in my body 24/7. I know my body. I understand my body. And I'm meeting more and more physicians that are more respectful of that understand they only know what they know based on what they've read or prior patients, but that they need to validate and legitimize what we come to them.
You mentioned a little bit about being in rehab. So I just wanted to, I guess, know if you could share just your experience of being in rehab. Was it like an in treatment or out treatment program? Because I know you spoke quite a bit about AA.
Sure.
Yeah, just I guess, and kind of like, the difference between being, treated for medically versus, I guess, like psychologically.
Look, there are people who come in. One of my old sponsors was like this. They come into the rooms of AA and they never go to treatment. They just jump into meetings, they get a sponsor and they do the steps. And in fact, my old sponsor has 14 years of sobriety. My experience in rehab, for me, it was, I loved it. It's going to sound strange. It kind of reminded me of theater school at first, because I got there and I found my people right away. I understood the way that they thought. I understood the way that what they said. I understood why they would do the things that they would do. I just was waiting for these people my whole life. I heard a guy say one time, which is shocking to normal people. He said, yeah, I stole and sold my father's dog to buy money to get crack. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I can see why you do that.
Was it like in Canada or in the US where you attended rehab?
It was in Los Angeles. Yeah. During that whole period of time where I had my second transplant, and then I overdosed for the second time. And then after that overdose, I went into a rehab facility and it was 60 days. It was extraordinary in terms of the opportunities. You got a weekly visit with a psychiatrist. I got twice weekly visits with therapists. There was 3 or 4 groups a day. They would take us to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. They would take us to the gym. There was group breakfasts that we had to learn how to be, part of community. We'd been isolating for so many years. And then after that, I did do like an outpatient therapy, outpatient program rather, for a number of months, like 7-9 months, something like that. And twice a week I would go. We did something called dialectical behavioral therapy, which I love.
Really common.
Yeah, it was, I loved it because I'm a list maker, and they're like, set your targets. And, it was right up my alley.
Therapist wants me to do.
Yeah. I loved it. It really helped boost my self-esteem, because by the time you get into rehab, I hadn't brushed my teeth. Like I was just, I was not showering. I was an animal. I lived for drugs. And so to just have a simple target, like I'm going to brush my teeth today and check that off. Like it sounds crazy when you're functioning and you're out in the real world, but for people that are just absolutely at death's door, this is like a big deal. Or people would talk about, I have to go to get my license renewed. And, it was just a huge thing to accomplish when your whole life up until that point has been just obsession over drugs and alcohol. So I love DBT.
So I want to ask you, as an actress, how have you found, do you find yourself judging TV shows where you see them portraying someone with alcoholism or an addiction? Are you going, oh, that's not right? Or like, oh, I could do that so much better. Like, do you have that reaction when you watch TV shows?
Yeah, I had trouble with two shows recently that Kevin and I binged because of this pandemic. One is HBO's Succession, and one of the lead characters begins the season in recovery. He's 3 years sober and he relapses, and he right away goes to meth, which is probably the most addictive substance out there. And then like 2 episodes later, he's functioning again, but he's occasionally drinking, he's occasionally doing meth. And to me, there may be somebody out there like that. I've never seen anybody like that in the 9 years I've been around Alcoholics Anonymous. Like once you've, like I said, lost that power of choice, and that was my experience in relapsing, it does not get better. It is not put on hold. It just continually gets worse and worse and worse. And there's no way this guy would be functioning and running some billion-dollar corporation. So it's a great question, because it's not a completely understood condition or disease, and it's not accurately portrayed. It's the same thing with the Queen's Gambit, which I really loved, but she'd go through these periods of time where she'd binge and then she'd pull it together and win chess games. And it's once you've lost that power of choice and you are completely locked in this disease, it's very rare that anybody is able to kind of control and manage their disease once they've relapsed.
So would you ever want to play a role as an alcoholic or as somebody with an addiction, or do you find that that's too personal?
No, that would be fine. Yeah. In fact, that'd be fun.
Okay.
I wouldn't mind that at all.
And well, alcoholism and drug addiction is officially classified as a disease. Do you think that the general public sees it that way? And, I kind of see it now under the realm of disability, which I didn't see that as that before. I'm seeing it as that now personally. But how do you think the public feels about it? Like, how has public reaction been to your story?
I definitely view it as a disease. It's a choice that I make that makes sense for me, to view it as a condition that I can treat every day. And I think the thing that is hard and why people still struggle to grasp what alcoholism is and addiction is that at its heart in Alcoholics Anonymous, we believe it's a spiritual malady or deficiency, meaning that it's all about me all the time. If any of you have been around any active alcoholics, or you suspect anybody's alcoholic, they are incredibly self-centered. Everything is about them, particularly if they're, in the throes of drugs and alcohol. But it's no different for me today. Like, this is what really works for me, is understanding that I need to switch the way that I think. This disease is really rooted in the way that I think. And I wake up, it's all about me. Kevin is just going to laugh if he watches this, because I say this every time, but I wake up and there's like a talk radio in my head, and it's all Henrietta all the time, 24/7. And I use these tools that I've learned about through the 12 steps in AA to sort of change the frequency, so that I'm thinking of other people. Because what ends up happening with an alcoholic is you can make yourself like your higher power. You become the obsession, like what I want out of life, who's standing in my way, what I want to happen, what I'm afraid of losing, what I want to get, it just becomes a way of life that then it's not sustainable. And it's a really tricky thing to explain to normal people who are just like, wake up. Like, my sister-in-law is this, I absolutely love her. She's just this incredibly generous person. She's always thinking of others. She's always doing for others. And I have to work at that. It doesn't come naturally to me. And that's not something when I sit in an office with a doctor and they see me today and I look fine, fine. And I'm speaking and I'm articulate, or somewhat articulate. And it's impossible for them to believe that I'm not fully recovered from this. But I guarantee you, if I don't use these tools every day, I can be a self-obsessed jerk at the drop of a hat. So I know for a fact, that's why it's a hard thing for people to understand who aren't alcoholic themselves. It's not so much about the drink or the drug or the sex or the gambling or the overeating. That's really just a symptom. Really what this condition is, it's about the way that I think and treating it like a kind of a spiritual malady.
How has the COVID pandemic affected your struggles with being a recovering addict? And what about your kidney disease?
The short answer is I'm good. I'm fine. I love Zoom. I don't have a problem with it. I'm sure some of you struggle with this too. I don't know, obviously, everything you guys deal with, but in terms of energy level and, I have a suppressed immune system. So last January, in fact, I was on a flight from Boston to Toronto and Toronto to Winnipeg. And by the time I got home, I had like a full blown just body flu cold. And I was in bed for most of January. So it's not unusual for me to be laid up and have to just take, I call them pajama days, which is a nice way of saying I really have zero energy to do anything. And I'm giving myself permission to take care of myself. So, in terms of this pandemic, it wasn't anything that I'm like, didn't know how to deal with. I'm also a writer. So I'm home all the time writing anyway. And I love Zoom because I've been able to go to AA meetings around the world, particularly in Los Angeles. And I've been able to see my friends there. I lived there for 22 and a half years and had a community there for 9 years. So that's been amazing. And then in terms of, now living in Winnipeg, there was initially like a worry because I wasn't quite dealt into Winnipeg. I've only been here a year and a half. Kevin's from here, but I'm not. And so what I did was I created 2 women's meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I host those, and I've been hosting those every week from March until the present day. And it's been amazing to see like who comes, and then there's word of mouth and people are talking about it. And sometimes we have 5 people, and last night we had 17 people, and it's amazing. So in that way, I'm getting to know women in Winnipeg, and eventually I'll meet them in person. But as long as I just keep things simple and I just take a few simple steps every day, I'm okay. One thing I've learned too in Alcoholics Anonymous is to just be in the now. I can't find peace if I'm worried about the past or I'm worried about the future. Peace and serenity can only be found in just trying to the best of my ability, being present right now. And no matter what my circumstances are, I really briefly at the beginning mentioned that I've suffered for years with really crippling nerve pain. And I almost lost my sobriety over it. And the way that I dealt with that was to sometimes take life 5 minutes at a time. We all of us in life, whether we have physical challenges or emotional challenges or something sideswipes us, like the death of a loved one, sometimes that's what we have to do. We just have to take it 5 minutes at a time.
What else would you want others to know about addiction and recovery?
I think what I would say, first of all, is to listen, to try and listen to an alcoholic that has some sobriety, that has some time, as we say. If you really want to learn about it, I had a great experience with a dermatologist at USC, and they were trying to help me figure out this nerve condition. And at the time I, filled out my forms. It was the first time I was meeting her, and I had 3 years of sobriety at the time. And she said, well, first of all, before I go any further, I want to congratulate you on your 3 years. And I was like, oh, well, thank you. But she said it in such a way that it was kind of loaded, like, and so I said, well, are you an addict or do you know somebody in recovery? And she said, no, I just had a really progressive mentor up in San Francisco. And he suggested that we all go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was like, mind blown. That's amazing. And what she said was, it really hijacks your mind, doesn't it? And I couldn't have said it, like I was saying earlier, it's centered in our mind and the way we think. I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, it's just this condition that hijacks the way that I think. And when I'm in active addiction, then it's just drugs and alcohol. And when I'm not in active addiction, it's Henrietta. So I wish if anybody really wanted to learn about Alcoholics Anonymous, just go to an open meeting and sit there and just listen to, you'll hear newcomers that are probably very self-absorbed. You'll hear people with a lot of time that are just full of wisdom, but also very crusty. I mean, you'll hear it. You'll hear the stories. And I think that's honestly the best way to learn about recovery and learn about what this disease is.
Henrietta, I want to thank you so much for coming on What's the Difference podcast today. And on behalf of all of us here, this has been absolutely eye-opening. And I find a lot of connections between what you're describing and obsessive compulsive disorder, which is what I have. And I can see a lot of similarities. But here's your chance to plug your book and your social media handles. So go ahead.
Well, thanks you guys. Like, first of all, besides that book, I want to thank you guys. You guys are an absolute delight. And I always love women coming together and the camaraderie that you guys have and the community that you guys have. And I'm just delighted to be here. I wrote a book about my marriage going through addiction called In Pillness and In Health. I think you can see it there. Mm-hmm. And yes, mostly on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is Hennybird. You can, my website is hennybird.com or myname.com. I'm also on Facebook, and it's impossible to miss me. There's no other Henriette Ivanans. So, and I love writing with readers and fans and other alcoholics and other people with chronic illness.